The death of those we love is hard. I just want to start with that. No matter what one's personal beliefs we may hold about death or an afterlife or the existence or non-existence of a soul that lives on, knowing that we will never see someone we love again in the same earthly way we have known them is heartbreaking. In many ways, death is the great unifier. Death does not seem to care where you live, how much money you have, whether you believe in one God or many gods or none at all. Death does not even care what political party you vote for. The mystery of death has touched every family. Indeed, it can feel strange, right? This moment, one moment your loved one is there in their body, in that place that we always go to find them, and the next minute, they're gone. But gone where? Religions across time have offered various answers to this question. Science gives us other answers. But no matter our beliefs about the answers to that question, I find that there are two things that are true. First, I think we would all agree that it is true that those we love live on in our memories. We keep them alive in our hearts, and we can feel connected to them through their descendants and through the way they touched the people and things in their lives. But I think there's a second thing about death that is also true. I think it is also true that no matter what belief we may hold about death, that when someone dies close to us, something shifts in us about death. Concepts can take a back seat to that raw, immediate experience and feeling of permanence of death. Sometimes we can even sense that there is that veil between life and death. And sometimes we have the experience that it indeed does thin, even if just for a moment. Since the time of recorded history, civilization, and recorded history of civilizations, there's actually evidence that humans have had experiences of being able to connect with those that have passed. And if not experiences, we've been talking about the hope that this is possible since time has begun. Now, of course, I fully acknowledge that there is no shortage of hoaxes and scams out there playing on our grief. They want to let us know we can contact our loved ones very simply. All we need to do is pay a little money and sit with them. And even recent developments in artificial intelligence play on our desire for this connection. I don't know if you've heard about ghost bots, but ghost bots are artificially generated images and voices of our loved ones that are present. We can have conversations with them. They give us messages. I have mixed feelings about this. They're not widely available yet, but we shall see. But these gimmicks and obvious hoaxes aside, I think there are those that have had experiences of connection across the veil of life and death. Maybe you are one of those people. The author and Celtic wisdom keeper, the late John O'Donohue, writes this about this veil. He says, "When a person is closer to death, the veil between this world and the eternal world is very thin. In some cases, the veil is actually removed for a moment so that you can indeed be given a glimpse into the eternal world." Now, this phenomenon is known as deathbed visions, and it's been well documented since about 1500s. Over and over, nurses and hospice workers and doctors describe sitting with someone who is dying and hearing their reports of visions of seeing or sensing someone who has gone before them present in the room. Almost universally, these visions create a sense of peace and calm within the person who is dying. Researcher and psychologist Marilyn Mendoza, who studies death, recounts this in her book. Her book has a great title. It's called "We Do Not Die Alone." The great part is her subtitle. Jesus is coming to get me in a white pickup truck. I like that image. In the book, she recounts the stories of many nurses and hospice workers who have been with the dying. And I want to recount a few of those today. Because there was one story of a 52-year-old woman dying of a failed transplant. And the nurse recounts this about her experience. She says this person was terrified of dying and often spoke about how she was never going to give in to death. 2 days before her death, she kept looking over her shoulder and laughing and smiling at someone standing behind me, but there was no one there. I asked the patient who she was talking to, and she told me it was her dead father. And then she said out loud, "Oh, okay, all right, I'm not afraid anymore." Another nurse shares, "I've seen patients die with their dead relatives standing by them, and I have seen patients die with only the living relatives in the room. I prefer the deaths where you know someone has come to get them. Then you know there is something more than what you get in this realm. It adds to the mystery of life and death. At least for me," she says, "it keeps me hopeful that when it is my time to go, someone I love will come back to get me." Regardless of whether you believe these events are hallucinations from a dying brain or true spiritual experiences from across the veil, the impact on the dying, the medical staff, and family can be profound and often help soften the grieving process. People have also reported experiencing physical connection with someone who has passed. Sometimes this comes in the form of what someone would call a sign. One doctor shared their experience he had after his mother and then his wife died. He says, "My wife died in January. When my mother died decades ago, I found several dozen pennies everywhere, and I knew it was no coincidence when I would walk to the mailbox and not see any pennies, but find them on the way back in the driveway. My great-grandchildren started calling them pennies from heaven. After my wife recently died, the pennies started appearing again and haven't stopped. I find stray pennies in the house, in the woods, around buildings, and when I'm walking the dog. Sometimes I am told where to walk to find them. When I go to shop, I am told where to park, and I find a penny near the trunk of the car when I come out." I also read an account of a woman who is sure that as she drove home in her car after her father's death, that she felt a physical sensation she was convinced was her father communicating with her. She describes speaking to her father as he lay on his deathbed, and after telling him how much she loved him and giving him permission to let go after what had been a long and painful illness, she asked him to give her a sign after he passed, to let her know that he was okay. A few hours later, as she drove home with her mother in the front seat of the car with no one in the back seat, she said she felt someone was kicking the back seat of the car with 5 clear pushes, just like her young daughter would often do when she was in the car riding behind her. But this time, the daughter was not there. Her father had a good sense of humor, and the woman was convinced that this was her father communicating with her. Of course, for one who did not experience these types of events, the incidents can simply be called a coincidence or the result of deep grief, something we make up in our minds trying to connect with those that have passed. But for the person experiencing it, these experiences feel real and clear. Now, I can attest to that last statement as I have my own story I want to share with you today. This type of story, too, is not unfamiliar to those who have lost a loved one. Now, my brother and I were not extremely close growing up. I have memories of us playing when we were young, But although we were 22 months apart, we always seemed to have different interests. He was into Star Trek and model cars, and I was into sitting out in nature and creating stories in my head. As adults, I became a new age spiritual liberal. He was a race car driving mechanic, conservative atheist. So we went our separate ways and only connected at family gatherings or during the very occasional phone call. And then one day, our relationship changed. It was May 15th, 2017. My husband and I were helping the movers take the last of the boxes from where we were moving. I was transitioning from my internship site in Winchester, Mass, back to our home in New York. I remember the moment so clearly. I was walking out of the apartment, and I remember with a box in hand, looking back at the apartment, and all of a sudden, I had this swoop of energy come through me. It was right about 11 a.m. The room took on this crystal clear, and in my mind, my heart just seemed to open and feel very filled with peace and joy. It kind of felt like a deep meditative experience I had had in the past. At the time, I just chalked it up to this transition, and I was joyful to be completing my internship and moving on to the next phase of my ministry. But I did note that it felt a little special, a little more poignant. The ride home was close to 3 hours and pretty much uneventful. But when we arrived back, my husband and I and the movers began unloading the truck. I remember standing at the bottom of the steps with a box in hand, and the phone rang. The caller ID said it was my brother's wife, Sharon. Sharon was not in the habit of calling me for no reason, so my first thought was concern for my dad, who had not been in great health and who lived near my brother and his wife. I answered the phone, hi, asking if everyone was all right, with the same breath. She paused and softly and plainly said, "Debbie, your brother died this morning." My mind spun, how, when, where. It turns out Sharon had been at work, and when she got home around 1 p.m., found him on the floor of the bathroom. It was later estimated that he had a heart attack that took him somewhere around 11 a.m. I hung up the phone, and I walked in a daze into my bedroom, box still in hand. And I sat on the bed expecting some tears to flow. But instead, I was surprised by what happened next. All I can say is it felt like this intense wave of my brother's energy coming so clearly into the room. It was really like he was there, and it startled me. And then this wave of energy literally came up through my body and out the top of my head. And then I heard my brother's voice, very crystal clear, as if he was physically there, and he said, "Whoa, this is so cool. I get it." Sorry. It was as if he was on the top of a Ferris wheel with a really cool view looking down, but I was down and I wanted to see what he was seeing. "This is so cool," he repeated, and then there was this magical moment where I felt lifted up too. I too felt like I was looking down on myself on the bed, and I had this amazing view of not only myself but all of life. I was at the same time aware of my body and aware of this universal self that connected us all. Literally, he was experiencing that interconnected reality, and somehow he was able to share the view with me for a moment. The veil between this life and the life he was experiencing lifted, and I got to peek. I remember laughing out loud. It was truly exhilarating, and then it felt deeply, deeply peaceful. It's hard to explain, but as you can tell, I can feel it to this day. It was a moment like none other I'd had in my life, and it was a moment when I felt with absolute clarity that death is nothing to be afraid of, and death is 100% not the end. That feeling and this open connection actually lasted very strongly in me for about 5 days before it started to fade. I was in this very altered state of bliss and consciousness. And to this day, I can feel it. I can connect back into that. And in any moments when I feel fearful of death, I remember my brother's words and I feel that energy. Between him and I, the veil between the worlds feels thinner. And interestingly, in the last minutes of my father's life, which was several years ago, I felt my brother enter the room, and he did too. Right before my father took his last breath, I remember we were laying there. He was in the hospital bed, my mother to one side, me to the other of him, and he just looked straight past my mom. I had already felt Jim's presence enter the room a minute before, so I smiled, and I looked at him and I said, "Jim's here, isn't he?" I already knew the answer. My dad couldn't speak, but his eyes said it all, and he just ever so slightly nodded. It wasn't long after that, and as quickly as Jim's energy had entered the room, it was gone, and my dad went with him. The poet David White has said it beautifully. He said, "The death of anyone close to us is always a form of salutation, a simultaneous goodbye to their physical presence, and a deep hello to a more intimate relationship now beginning to form in their absence." And indeed, that is what it felt like for me and continues to feel like for my brother. The relationship I have with him now is far deeper than anything we had in life, and we connect on a level that I don't connect with anybody else. Now, I realize that we all hold different beliefs, and thus we may have different interpretations of deathbed visions and physical manifestations and spiritual connections between the living and the dead. And that's okay, because it truly is a mystery. And whether you have experienced your loved one connecting with you from beyond the veil through words or feeling sense, or maybe through nature, or through a kick in the back, whether that connection has come in the form of memories that you nurture or through the gift of compassionate wisdom that they left you, I pray for you that you are comforted knowing that this other one, will always be with you, and that relationship doesn't end. It's just a little different. And perhaps they will be the one waiting for you when the time comes for you to cross that veil. I'm going to invite us into a moment of reflection as we hold this space. And close your eyes if you feel like closing your eyes, or just take a few breaths. And again, bring the images to life of those whom you love, who have crossed. And as you are able, I invite you to bring not just the image, but the felt sense of this one into the room, as if they were sitting right beside you, filling our sanctuary with their presence. And in a moment, I'll invite you to call out their name, almost as if you were introducing them to everybody, acknowledging their presence here as we hold this space together. Feel free to call their name out loud. So holding this space in our hearts, can we sing just the first verse of Comfort Me? To take a moment, take a breath. If you'd like to put your hand on your heart. You can just hum if you'd like. May you hold their presence in your heart today and throughout your days. And may that veil be ever thinner with you and them so that you continue this relationship in beautiful ways. Blessed be.